Okay, we should be live.
Hmm.
Yes, we are live. Let me just wait for the go ahead from Rockfin as well
Hmm.
that we are live. Rumble looking good, Odyssey looking good. Rockfin, we are good to go. Locals, the community and locals, always looking good on locals. And YouTube, all is good. Moderators on YouTube, Zarael, Valies. Who else is with us? Myself, I'll be helping out in the moderation as well. So we have a very capable and good-looking crew in moderation on YouTube, and we have a great-looking panel right here of distinguished gentlemen and experts. Of course, we have a gentleman in London, the Oracle of London, Alexander Mercurse. We have the very, very distinguished gentleman somewhere in China, Alex from Reporterfy. And of course, we have the brave and courageous gentleman coming to
Yeah.
us from, I believe, somewhere in Russia. We have Mr. Patrick Lancaster as well. So, Alexander, I pass it on to you. By the way, everybody, I have got Alex and Patrick's information in the description box down below. Please follow their channels. Please follow any of the links that I've put in the description box. And at the end of the video, I will have all of those links as a pinned comment as well. Alex, I pass it off to you so we can get started on this live stream.
Absolutely. Now, can I just say, I think it's an absolutely outstanding panel. Both Patrick and Alex, we are privileged to have you on. Can I say that you're both at the forefront? You're reporting from perhaps the most important places in the world at the moment. I'm going to continue to refer to it as the conflict in Ukraine, but it's important to remember that the people of many of these territories which have been fought over consider themselves to be Russian. And of course, people in Russia, the Russian government, and these people themselves now also consider their territories to be part of Russia. But I'm going to stick to calling it Ukraine simply because this has become the habit now. Maybe a bad habit, but I'm not going to break it at the moment. And of course, Alex, lots going on in China. You'd be astonished, I think, if you were in Britain and could see the headlines here. You may not know this, but you are at the beginning of the collapse of the Xi regime in China. There's a vast wave of protests sweeping the country. And of course, you're going to be there. You can tell us all about it from the ground. But shall we start with Ukraine? Because, of course, this is a war. It's a hard, grinding, brutal war where there's been photographs circulating for the first time in the British media showing us fighting in Bakhmut, Artyomsk. I hope I'm getting that name right. It's the same city, different names. The Ukrainians call it Bakhmut, the Russians call it Artyomsk. I suspect most of the people who live there prefer it to be called Artyomsk. Anyway, pictures, they look like straight out of something from the First World War, from the battles of Passchendaele and Ypres, these two places. Well, they're the same place, essentially. It's horrifying to see what is going on. But one is also getting the sense, and this is increasingly my view, at least in the West, that this feeling that Ukraine was sweeping to some kind of military victory is now starting to ebb. I sense that the feeling is that the situation is changing, and that the battle lines are hardening, but also that a big offensive is coming. And of course, winter is closing in, and there's going to be lots of discussions about what all of that means. But we are privileged to have Patrick Lawrence with us. Patrick, you're on the battle lines. You've been in the north. You've been seeing these places where Ukraine has been trying to launch these offensives to try to break into Lugansk region towards Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. They seem to be grinding to a stop. They're suffering heavy losses there. as far as I can see. It's a horrible tragedy. You've been in Kherson region as well. You can tell us about the situation in Kherson region, what people feel about the Russian withdrawal over the Dnieper. And perhaps at this point, having just made my introduction, I think perhaps I'll pass it over to you and you can just give us your general impressions, and then maybe we can look at things in a little more detail.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Alexander, and definitely for the both of you. Thanks for having us here today, and it's really a pleasure to be here again with you. And Alex, Reporterfy, it's great seeing you as well as normal. And on to the point. Yes, I've been spending a lot of time up north in the area of the border between the Lugansk People's Republic, Kharkov Oblast, and the Russian mainland Russian border as well. And now that area, I arrived not too long after Ukraine made its offensive and took control of the vast majority of the area that Russia controlled in the Kharkov region. Now, a lot of people think that Ukraine completely controls the full Kharkov region, and that is just not the case. In some of my reports of over the last weeks, I've shown areas that are controlled by the Russian forces. And yes, there are areas of the Lugansk People's Republic that are controlled by Ukraine, but it's a very small area. They were, as you said, they were on a very good push. Ukraine was when it took control of the majority of the Kharkov region, and they came into LNR. But since then, they have stalled, and the line has been a little bit of all right, you take this, we take this, and back and forth. And then it started to move more in the last weeks of Russia taking bits and bits at a time. Not major gains, but little villages and little areas. And at any given time, it's really, even though I've been spending so much time over in that area, it's hard to tell on any given day what area is controlled by who. And not only me as a journalist, but some of the soldiers as well. Even though there is good communications, it's just things happen so fast on the line. I mean, it's like a different world up there. I mean, the just going from one area to the one village to the other, you have to be in a full-on either tank or military vehicle. But kind of getting off the point, there is active battle going on constantly there. I've been showing it in my reports with the intense artillery battles going back and forth. I kind of made it almost a mission of mine while I was there, just to kind of as a side story, besides just showing the fact of the artillery battles, showing as many different variants of the Russian military equipment as possible, just as kind of something for people to learn from my reports. And I was able to do quite a few different mini, like the TOS 1A, which they call the super flamethrower, which is really just a truck that fires a rocket that's with thermobaric heads that just sucks the oxygen out of the areas that it explodes. But it's just kind of a little bonuses for my reports for people to learn from. But for the news itself, it seems like Kharkov it's not frozen. They're rebuilding, they're fortifying their lines, especially on the Russian side. I've seen many of the anti-tank concrete triangles, offhand, I forget the name, but the triangles that are there to block tanks from coming, and they're making huge ditches and reinforcing, not only the soldiers reinforcing these areas, but they have civilian contractors coming in and reinforcing these lines, not only the first line, but the second, third line. So they're really hardening the lines up there. But they're still slowly moving forward. But the the fact on the ground there is that there is no solid ground. All of the ground has just been liquefied. I mean, there's just half a meter of mud where almost wherever you go out in the back areas, just because with the military equipment going back and forth, it's so much water, some snow coming down, a lot of rain coming down, and a lot of the military equipment is just getting bogged down. But it seems, as you said, winter's coming. Once winter comes, I think we can all reasonably expect that Russia is going to be making a push into the Kharkov region and, of course, cleaning up what's left under control of Ukraine of the Lugansk People's Republic area, or internationally recognized as the Lugansk region of Ukraine. Now, beyond that, as far as the what's been happening in Kherson, of course, we saw another offensive there, where this week Ukraine took control of the west bank of the Dnieper fully after first Russia announced a withdrawal of civilians because they told the civilians there was going to be intense fighting going on and they wanted to get the civilians out. And then once they got as many civilians out, gave them time to get out, not all left. The Russian forces, after much uncertainty from people like us looking at them of what's going to happen, they made the announcement to withdraw their forces fully from the West Bank. And now Ukraine is, as I said, under control of fully of the West Bank. Now, on the East Bank, I was just there days ago, and it's a very different story than when I was there over the summer. Things have changed a lot, obviously. But I made my way through the area, and especially to the area of Novokhovka, and spoke to the mayor about the situation and saw how they are now and had been evacuating people from the East Bank. And I said, okay, well, if Russia is evacuating civilians from the East Bank, can we assume that possibly the same thing is going to happen, that after the civilians are evacuated, the Russians are going to be evacuating the military as well? And he said there's absolutely no way that's going to happen. He fully believes that there's no chance. Okay, now we can take that with a grain of salt fully, but looking in his eyes, we can see that that's truly what he believes. Now, after speaking to him, I went through the city and saw the intense damage that had happened because of more than a week of before I got there. That is when Ukraine came forward to the Dnieper. Now, but last time I was there, they were 40, 50 kilometers away, and they just in one day came within 3 kilometers of the city, just across the river. And we made our way after seeing a lot of the new destruction that had happened just since Ukraine came. We made our way to the waterfront, slowly going up with the assistant mayor, making our way to the waterfront of the Dnieper to try to get a glimpse of the newly controlled Ukrainian territory. And it was strangely quiet as we arrived. We arrived thinking, okay, there's a chance to show this. We might come under attack because we're just going to be right across. This is the front line, and every other time I've been to the front line, you've got it going back and forth pretty heavily. And we get down there, and surprisingly, we get to the front, to the water side, full gear and everything, as you can see in my reports, and we run into a lot of fishermen, locals. That a lot of them, that's how they get extra food on a daily basis, or just do it as a hobby. And this is the front line, and we can still hear those shells going back and forth. We didn't come under anything directly, but I mean, there was obviously things going back and forth, and it was just almost like a shock seeing that the people still living, even in this situation, just the very front line. I mean, right across the river, Ukraine territory. Right here, Russian-controlled territory, but the people are still living. And I got a chance to speak with some of the people there, and the overall feeling is that the situation was horrible. Some of them were happy that Russia was still there and hadn't evacuated. Some of them said either way, they just want to live a good life, but they're not living a good life right now. And some of others didn't want to talk at all for whatever reason. I mean, it could be one side or the other. It's just a speculation at that point. But there is intense fighting in that city and the areas around it. I didn't, I haven't yet gone to the area more towards the city of Kherson itself, just because it's a little bit more different worldly and more sketchy in that direction. So it's a process. As things go on, things will get a little bit more clear. Just that's how journalistic access and stories evolve. So that's the situation I'm at in her son, and of course there's a lot of other stories going on all across the front line. Unfortunately, me and my team can't be at all the locations, but we do our best to get to as many of them as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Patrick. Can I just say, I mean, the Northern Front, where a lot of this fighting is going on, is the one that gets the least attention, at least in the West. You never hear about it. I mean, it's never discussed. There's been an awful lot said about Kherson region. There's a certain amount said about what's going on in Artyomsk or Bakhmut or wherever, but about what's going on in the north, that's not talked about. And I suspect partly the reason for that is that it's exactly what you said. Ukraine stalled. Its offensive didn't break through into Lugansk. It didn't recapture Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, as I remember some people saying that it would. And I think it's been a disappointment. Are there many civilians still there? I mean, is this an area where you still see lots of civilians, or have they all been evacuated?
The area I have spent more time in is the more northeast area of the Lugansk People's Republic, and just above the line into the Kharkov region. Now, most of these areas are fully frontline villages. And a lot of them have been evacuated, but every single village, we always come across civilians that have just said, you know what, this is my home. I don't care what happens. I'm not going to leave. So a lot of them have been evacuated, but there's always going to be holdouts, no matter where it is, whether it's Mariupol, Artyomsk, Donetsk, Lugansk, wherever it is, no matter how hard it gets. There's going to be strong people that wade through the terror.
And your sense is that there's an offensive coming in the north, because there's been a lot of discussion about this winter offensive. I mean, is this something that people are talking about on the ground? Is there lots of discussion amongst the soldiers? Is there a feeling that an offensive is coming? Or is this just journalistic talk that we get in the West, that, with general winter on the way, where there's build up by the Russians with all the reservists coming in, that there's going to be an offensive? Is that reflected amongst the people there, or is it not?
Well, I can tell you, as far as the civilian population, this is what they're hoping for, and this is what they're expecting, because it does make sense. The ground is going to freeze the hardest in the north. Obviously, we're talking about the weather. So the people are praying and hoping for this winter and offensive, as you put it, to start as soon as the ground freezes. Now, I've talked to many people that I can't really say exactly who they are, but I put out the question, do we think something is going to happen before New Year's? And they said, well, That's too long. It's going to happen sooner. So, I mean, this is all hearsay, but this is what I'm getting, and
Yeah.
it makes sense. There's been for the last week and a half, I guess it's been snow up north, on and off, and there's gonna be a freeze that doesn't thaw, and once that happens, it's gonna get more and more hardened, and things are gonna just start flowing, I think.
Can I just ask another question, which is about the condition of the soldiers? I mean, you talked about the mud, the slush. I mean, it must be absolutely horrible to be fighting in conditions like that. I mean, are they looking forward to the colder weather, the freeze up? Is that going to make it easier for them, or is it the cold weather something that they're dreading? I mean,
Well, I can tell you they've prepared a lot with the positions they're in. I mean, we've seen some of the videos coming out on the Ukrainian side with them just kind of wallowing. I'm not sure if you've seen the videos I'm referring to, but there's some positions that are just video coming from the Ukrainian side where just pools of mud. But up north, even though it's muddy, I haven't seen that at all, and can be seen in my reports. They've done a good job of making their positions kind of mud proof. Now, in my experience, definitely once the freeze comes, it's so much easier to get around the front, just because, for one, you're not wet. Even though you're cold, you're not wet and cold. And the second is just mobility. You can move around faster and move around easier without accidentally breaking your leg. You can concentrate more on what's coming out of the sky, and then how you're moving around the trenches. Yeah, so I think the freeze is going to make things a lot better. Not just the vehicles moving, but the people as well.
right. Can I just also ask something else? Because I'm getting the sense that a lot of these Ukrainian attacks that have been happening in the north, it's become essentially a sort of exercise of bashing oneself constantly against these heavy defenses. Is there a sense that the Ukrainians are losing a lot of men and machines on these attacks, and it's becoming really a sort of bleeding of the Ukrainian army there, that they're being pushed into attacks which perhaps they might be better advised not to be making? Or is there some logic, some military rationale behind all of this? I mean, maybe that's a difficult question to answer, but is this something that people are talking about there?
Well, it is a difficult question. As far as the Ukrainian casualties, all I can say is what I have heard from authorities and military personnel on the Russian side, which they say there's massive casualties on the Kharkov side. Now, I can say what I've seen as far as the Russian military equipment firing. I've seen massive amounts of Russian military equipment and artillery firing on Ukrainian positions, and I have seen the extent of their the different ways that they target the military personnel through many different types of drone activity. When they've just got the drones overhead, I've filmed these where they got the drones overhead, and they're literally saying, okay, a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, this many degrees, and just with almost pinpoint accuracy. Now, of course, the same thing goes for the Ukrainian side. I came under shelling, and we literally saw the Ukrainian drone over top of us, correcting the artillery that was coming down on us. So luckily it wasn't that pinpoint. I mean, it is what it is. There's people dying on both sides. The Russian military says there's more dying on the Ukrainian side. I film what I can see at the time. and show that to the best of my ability.
Yeah. Can I ask you? I mean, I understand you've been reporting in other places, but of course, Donetsk city has been the target of heavy shelling. We discussed this
Hmm.
in the previous live stream where you were with us, our first live stream, and I'm sort of got the sense that this has slackened off a little. Is this true? I mean, is this what's actually happened, or is it continuing at the same level as before?
Well, I wouldn't say it's continuing at the same level, but it's still continuing daily. There's no question about that. The shelling of civilian areas in Donetsk is a daily event. Just 2 days ago, there was a man killed when a piece of shrapnel went directly through his forehead while he was standing waiting for his car to fill up with gas at the gas station, because I've lived in Donetsk for the majority of the 8 years, the gas station that I used to use on a daily basis, right next to the Donbass Arena, which is the arena that the Donetsk soccer team used to play at. And just, I believe it was last night, there was a rocket or artillery attack that hit the cafe where actually me and my wife took dancing lessons for our wedding. I mean, these are all civilian areas that luckily not every time a civilian gets killed, because sometimes it's at night or just God's looking over the soldier protecting people of Donetsk. But these are civilian areas. Of course, there could be military targets getting hit as well. Who knows? But the fact is that these civilian areas are getting hit on a daily basis in the exact center of Donetsk. There's no question about it. This is not something that has stopped at all in the last 9 months, or for that matter, in the last 8 years. Of course, over the last 8 years, not every day it hit the center, but it's been hitting the center for many, many months now. And it's not just rockets. It's not just artillery. I mean, we're talking little mines that fall out of the sky, land mines that this rocket blows up over the sky, and all these hundreds of little land mines that are green and blend in with everything just fall down on the main parks of the center. I mean, what kind of logic could Ukraine be using to do this on a civilian area in the center, on civilian parks? I mean, it's not logical, besides to spread terror. I mean, and this is a fact that's been going on. There's no doubt about it. It's been documented time over time. So, yeah, without getting much more emotional about it, not much more I can say about it.
No, I mean, what I would say about it is simply this, that it just doesn't get covered in the Western media at all. I mean, if you are following the Western media, you do not know about the shelling of Donetsk. It's simply something that just doesn't happen. And I mean, that is astonishing, but it's also the case. Well, can I just say, I mean, we are now all expecting the winter offensive. Will that... Are people in Donetsk itself looking forward to this? Is this the moment when they hope that this nightmare for them will end?
I think at this point, everybody in Donetsk, when February 24th, when everything started this year, I think everybody thought it was going to happen, be over in the first week. I mean, I myself made a naive report the first day saying, oh, today is going to be the last day Donetsk is a frontline city. And boy, were we wrong. So I think right now, people are a little bit more realistic, and I don't think anybody's expecting this to be over in the winter. I'm thinking people are hoping by the summer and praying by the summer, but not confident.
Well, let's hope so, because there's a shelling of civilian areas, whatever the justification, whatever the rationale, is a terrible thing. I don't know that there is any justification. I just want to say that, by the way.
Yeah.
Alex, you've been telling us that there's been all kinds of interesting things going on in Monaco that you've been hearing about, all related to situations with Ukraine. Ukraine seems to be going through an extraordinary time. We've had attacks on the energy system. There's reports that the economy, to all intents and purposes, is grinding to a stop, that it's basically sustained now by Western funds pouring in. I read a report somewhere, I can't confirm this, I don't know that anybody can, that $20 billion of aid in some one form or another can't be accounted for. What have you been hearing coming out of Monaco?
Well, just to inform your viewers, I lived in Monaco for almost 2 decades after I moved out of Canada, and after that I moved to Asia. I had a long phone call with a few of my Monaco mates over the last few days, and I'm not sure if you guys watched the news yesterday, but Vyacheslav Duran, a very wealthy Russian Monegasque or Monaco resident, was killed in a helicopter crash yesterday. And this has really sparked a lot of course, theories on why. He was also connected to a Ukrainian-funded organization that was helping people out. But I want to dial this back a bit here and just give the audience a real understanding about Monaco. Monaco is quite a unique place. It's about 35,000 population. 29,000 of those are actual Monegasque, or actually 6,000 of those are Monegasque residents. The other 29,000 are either millionaires or billionaires. And to get into Monaco, you have to go through a couple of tests. And one of the biggest one is to show your bank account. Okay. And the interesting thing here is that the connection here with this Russian billionaire. Now, this is the third billionaire in cryptocurrency that has died mysteriously here in the last 3 weeks. This is very strange stuff going on. And if you start to see the connections here on how this is all formed, there was a big report that did come out of the Ukraine in the summer. They called it the Monaco Battalion. I did ask my friends, are you seeing plates in the Ukraine? You guys have heard about the Monaco Battalion, I'm sure. They would say every 6th or 7th Ferrari or Lamborghini or Porsche has a Ukraine license plate on it, driving around in the Principality. There are yachts down there as well. And we got to look at how this, I'm going to call it the world's greatest or biggest washing machine, is actually playing out. We are seeing a staggering amount of money being raised here. And some of it's through crypto. Some of it's through banking systems, of course, interesting enough. And the SBI, the State Bureau of Investigation in the Ukraine, started their investigation in the Monaco Battalion. But while they were doing that, they decided that they're going to investigate the people that are investigating these people. So they've also gone after some of the reporters that have put this paper out and said that they're investigating them as well. Quite interesting. One way to really shut down media by scaring the living bejesus out of them. So anyway, this goes in much deeper here. If you understand how the banking systems work in Monaco, it's very interesting. There's not that many banks. Monaco is the size of Central Park. That's it. It's 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. You can, I drove around it for 20 years. I know pretty much every street there. Some of these billionaires were staying at the Monte Carlo Bay. I used to visit there every couple of weeks, swim in the pool. With a $2.5 million to $3 million annual rent fee, you got to have some dollars to hang around in this area. But where it gets interesting is a lot of these foundations and a lot of these charities that are being run have links to Zelensky. And the funds that are being brought into these organizations can only be brought into 2 bank accounts or 2 banks in the Ukraine. Okay. And one of these banks are on one of the heads of the banks is under investigation by the Department of Justice for the tune of about $5.5 billion. So we're seeing that nice money supposed to be going towards a good cost, being funneled into the system, rerouted, heading out to Monaco, going into the washing machine and into the system. This is a textbook way to launder money. They're doing it. I don't think I have to remind the viewers here that Zelensky is, he has connections to BVIs, British Virgin Island companies, very cheap to open up, $2,000 or $3,000 to open up. You then get a quasi board of directors to hide who is behind these corporations. But I just wanted to bring this to light that we're seeing some mysterious things going on in the crypto market here, especially a Russian billionaire dies in a helicopter crash with clear weather in the Côte d'Azur. I mean, on a nice sunny day. Sorry, guys, in 20 years that I've been down there, I haven't seen it, but bizarre things do happen in Monaco. I don't know if you guys know that Safra Bank, there was a staged, his nurse apparently staged a rescue attempt, but he ended up burning down the bridge and the multi-billionaire in the same time. And then he magically escaped from prison. So lots of weird things go on in Monaco, but it doesn't surprise me. But when I was leaving Monaco, the Russians were coming in there heavily, but now it's the Ukrainians that are moving their money there. Lots of multi-billionaires are there setting up trusts, organizations, offshore bank accounts. And to me, if I was a taxpayer in North America, seeing this type of activities happening, it wouldn't surprise me that once all of this is over, that Zelensky maybe, possibly, would have a residency in Monaco when this is all done. It wouldn't surprise me. Just can't. Sorry.
Okay. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And I have to say, this is a story that I've seen before. I mean, I've seen it. We saw it in Afghanistan. We saw it in South Vietnam. Going back in time, I can remember similar things happening in the Greece of my childhood, where there was a major interest in supporting the political system in Greece from the United States because of the Cold War. Money poured in. It was profoundly corrupting. One of the ways to create corruption is to send money into a very, very poor country. Vast amounts of money. They completely distort the economy, the political system. They generate corruption. And of course, inevitably, a laundry is created and it ends up in places like Monaco.
Yeah, very real. It's very real. And I mean, it is going on right in front of our eyes. You can't really hide in a 2x2 kilometer principality like Monaco. Yeah. These bankers, it's happening, guys.
Absolutely. Now, the other thing about this, of course, is that it creates a financial incentive to prolong the war, because it means that there are people who are personally, materially benefiting from it in ways that are, unimaginable to most of us. I mean, there's the sums of money. You spoke about somebody being investigated for $5 billion, for example. I mean, I'm not saying all of that money stuck to this person, but this gives us some idea of the funds that are happening. And of course, when these kind of machines, laundry machines work, it becomes a kind of reason to keep a war going, because this particular class group of people who benefit from it, well, they have no real material incentive to achieve peace, to find a negotiation. And of course, they become violent themselves and dangerous. And that makes any idea of peace extremely difficult.
Yeah, I've compiled quite a bit of a report on this. So if people do need my backup research, I'm happy to hand it over. But it continues to grow. I thought I was pretty much compiled everything until I got news last night that the billionaire's helicopter slammed into the side of a hill in Villefranche, which is, a 15, 20-minute ride. And the other interesting fact is that the passenger that was supposed to be flying with him canceled at the last minute. So this isn't this isn't a conspiracy theory. This stuff is in the papers. Monaco has a pretty good control on its own local media, that's for sure. Spending time there for 20 years, what gets out and what doesn't get out. But they don't call it a sunny place for shady people. There are some real honest, nice people that run good organizations and good companies down there. But then this is what really tarnishes the reputation of Monaco and really drags it through. And it's very clear, after having a few conversations with my friends that live there as well, they said, yes, the Ukrainians are here. They're setting up. The yachts are, tied up to the moorings, and it's business as usual.
Let's move on to other things, because we got to. As I said at the start of the program, you are in a country which, if you listen to the media here in Britain and in the United States, is on the brink of revolution. And I would say, by the way, if you were following the media in Britain, Ukraine was not the big story over the last week. It was protests in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Guangdong, in all of these places. And this was the big story. Now, I have to say, I read all of these reports. And one of the things that I found very interesting about them is two things. Firstly, there were photographs, but these photographs never gave you a real impression of how big these protests were. And I never saw even a guesstimate about the number of people involved in these protests. And of course, protests, as I'm sure you will confirm, are not actually that rare in China. I mean, they do take place fairly regular basis. What can you tell us about these protests? Is the government tottering? Is Xi Jinping, worrying about the fact that he might be overthrown?
Well, I mean, if you're going to view that on a few teenage Chinese people putting white papers in front of their face is going to overthrow the Xi government here. I've got a 5,000, a few thousand-year-old wall in China I can sell you. I mean, the interesting thing here is, let's see, the people that are watching the show today, they're watching the Duran, the Patrick Lancasters, myself, because they've lost trust in the media. Okay. And very simple. People in the comment section, I'm not sure if everybody puts a grain of salt in what the BBC does, or Fox News, or Sky News, or whatever. Let's remember how we all got here, watching channels like Brian Berletic or Ira Gray and stuff like that. Is we lost trust in the media. So now we're supposed to trust BBC's and CBC's and NBC's reporting on China. As this is coming out of a typical rule book. We noticed through Telegram a few nights ago that the NGOs were working very hard. The NEDs, your National Endowment Fund, a lot of these NGOs were working very hard. And NDI as well. That's the National Democratic Institute. That is funded by to the tune of about $100 million, also from the U.S. State Department. You got to remember, these forces are at work here. Of course, the successor himself, George Soros, got in with his Human Rights Watch, and he's invested $100 million into that as well. You have to remember that these are the same forces, same playbook that they used in Maidan, the same playbook to try to destabilize China. It's not going to work. Nice try. It was great. We got a burst of maybe 48 hours of the wall is falling here in China. But most of these NGOs were kicked out after the Hong Kong fiasco. And do I shed a tear when the BBC and CNN get scolded at news conferences for the reporting inside of China? Whether the audience wants to believe me or not, but here in China, I'm in one of the biggest cities here, Chongqing, 32 million people. We are under COVID preventions right now because we have a rise in cases. We have been reporting that. It's very clear. It's devastating for some of the small business owners here. Devastating when you close down communities for 2 or 3 weeks. It's tough. People get upset. Absolutely. And we will continue to see people get upset. It's when their livelihood is, diminishing because of a pandemic. It's not good anywhere globally. And, we'll get the media that will report saying, oh, these are tough lockdowns. These are chaotic lockdowns. I mean, we saw lockdowns in Italy for 70 days, Thailand, 67 days, England, 103 days, state of California was 83 days, and so on and so forth. So the playbook here was, this was an opportunity. The Western media jumped on it. Of course, a BBC reporter still waiting for his photographs of him being beaten to come out. Haven't seen them yet because there's an investigation by the BBC for that. So when we see this type of playbook, it's very common in China for that to happen. The NGOs ramp it up. They use Telegram, and they're very easy to spot on Telegram. But you're not going to, it's impossible for people to really get a grasp on how much the local people actually trust the government here. I'm just going to quickly go through some numbers, and then I'm waiting for all the questions from you, Alexander, because I know you ask very good ones all the time. So if you have the CPC, which is 96 million members, and they have brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins and whatever, that branches out to about 700 to 800 million people in a country of 1.5 billion. And you have all those people working together. Just an example, our COVID preventions here, we had 600,000 volunteers just in this city here. So unfortunately, for the Western media, they've used the same playbook that they've used on Ukraine. They've used the same organizations. I'm just really surprised that people aren't seeing through this, and I think the viewers are starting to figure this out too. 3 names that you should put in your scrapbook to pay attention to: Human Rights Watch, that's HRW; NED, the National Endowment for Democracy; and the National Democratic Institute. Not saying that there's not good NGOs around the world, but these 3, oh boy, they love just ripping it up on China. And it was a pretty interesting thing. They got a lot of news flow out of it. But yeah, my last thing that I'm going to say here is I expect the government that they are trying to, mitigate out of this pandemic here. I think we're going to see some pretty interesting news over the next couple of days here. We're starting to see some media stuff come out where it's educating this public that be prepared if China does open. Here's what you have to do. You have to you have to prepare for it. We saw it on the Canton Tower in Guangzhou tonight, that they lit up on the tower, and Guangzhou has opened up today, and they said on the tower, this is one of the largest towers in the world, that basically, okay guys, it's time to be responsible, and there is a feeling here that now we're going to open up. So I'm ready for your questions.
Well, can I just start with not so much with the question as an observation, which is, of course, that all these protests, we had all the massive media coverage about the protests in China, in the West, and virtually no reporting at all of the local election results in Taiwan. And they
yes, I was going to mention that.
essentially on the very same day. And maybe I'm wrong here, but I did wonder whether the coverage of the one, which seemed to me totally disproportionate to the scale of what was happening, was partly perhaps intended because, we were rather uncomfortable about the results of the other, and we didn't really want to talk about that so much.
That's interesting, Alexander, that you brought that up, because that will pretty much send a lightning bolt down to the people about the Taiwan and the China relationship. She's stepping down. She's leaving the leadership there, and they got blown out of the water on their election. And they were going on the anti-China, let's get together. Got to remember, Taiwan has purchased almost, I've got it here somewhere here, a staggering amount. I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood between $20 and $30 billion from the Americans since 2010 on artillery. And that's a lot of cash. That's a lot of artillery that they haven't actually had to put into battle or use yet. And of course, we saw the parade with Nancy Pelosi, and her team of senators come over here and start the drive to sell some more arms, which is very interesting. But yes, her resigning, it got really not much press. It did get press here, that's for sure. And of course, Jiang Zemin passed away yesterday at 96. So that's been getting a lot of media attention here as well. But yeah, you're right. This Taiwan thing really surprised the media. They quickly, as you rightfully have brought up here, they did kind of put it under the rug quickly and silently. I bet you most of the people watching today aren't even aware of that.
I have to say, we've discussed this before on the Duran. It did remind me a bit of the Zelensky election in Ukraine. 72% of the people voted for a candidate who they thought was going to promote peace. And of course, in the end, it brought about war. And I do wonder whether Taiwan. I mean, I don't think this is the end of the Taiwan story. I just wanted to also say something else, by the way, and this might interest Patrick. There's been a report circulating that Taiwan isn't getting all the ammunition and all the weapons that is ordered because they've all been sent to Ukraine instead. So I don't know how true that is.
Something's got to break. They can't have enough for everybody, I guess.
We can't have enough. Well, it would seem so. Yeah.
I think you're right, Alexander. I mean, we haven't heard the last of this Taiwan story at all. I mean, when the media takes its eyes off of Ukraine, as Patrick says, maybe possibly next summer, Taiwan's the next target. There's no doubt about it. There's too much money going in there, investing into arms. The NGOs are piled in there. There's huge amounts of NGOs sitting there waiting to ramp it up. And it's like an a la carte menu in a restaurant. Okay, I will take instability for 5 million. I will take it's social media warfare. It really is, and they have a tough time getting that over in China here. And I think a lot of it's got to do with of course, blocking Facebook and Twitter. But can you imagine if they allowed Facebook to run wild here and had no control over it with all the stuff that Zuckerberg and the boys have been up to dealing with some of these government organizations? So it's interesting. But I think, watching it on the BBC, I did see some of the coverage. I got to learn how to really get bigger camera angles, for my next subscriber party. If I want to show like there's a million people, I've got to learn how they do it.
Can I just jump in? And since you mentioned Zuckerberg, just for everyone to reflect on, the New York Times had their Deal Book Summit yesterday. And it's a summit where they have business leaders and visionaries. And the people attending this summit being interviewed were SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX. We know what he was doing in Ukraine. We had Zuckerberg of Facebook, Janet Yellen, and of course, the one and only Zelensky. Just so everyone understands what they're trying to tell us about what's going on.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, that I have to say, that does remind me, what Alex has just told us reminds me of all that you've been telling us about Monaco, Alex, and what's been going on there. I mean, I have to say the FTX story is an astonishing one. And it seems to me that it rhymes again with your Monaco. What you're telling us is coming from Monaco. Anyway, the other thing I wanted just to touch on, and it's fairly brief because we're coming up to an hour, but I just wanted to say this. There was this G20 summit meeting in Bali a short time ago, and I at the time said this is an inconsequential event. I mean, I'm on video saying this. Nothing came of this meeting. It was a complete failure. I've now been drilling in, getting information from all types of sources and things. And I've come to a radically different view. I think Bali actually was a dividing point between the world that was and the world that is coming. Because it's clear that the G7, the United States and its friends, in other words, tried to take over the agenda at Bali. They tried to focus it all on their version of events in Ukraine. And everybody else basically said no. And in fact, for the first time, it wasn't the president of the United States who dominated the discussions in Bali. It was the president of China and the Russian representative Lavrov, far from being isolated, was absolutely involved in all of the discussions with all of the other leaders who were busy making and cutting deals with each other. Has this been talked about in China at all? Have people in China noticed this? That, as I said, Bali was this moment when you sensed for the first time in a major international meeting that the power is shifting.
I just want to say to the viewers again, living in China here and traveling to this country back and forth for many decades here, things move in a very organized manner. You're not normally going to see governments massively change a direction. And that's why we've been in this COVID prevention thing for almost 3 years here. They will stick to it. And I think there was a major dressing down of some politicians here at the G20. And the way that China gets its message out is to look at the countries that it can make a difference in. And it looks at, the collective West and it says, wait a minute. Do we do another deal with the devil? Been burned once, been burned twice. Should we be burned the third time? Here we have them selling military arms into the billions into one of our provinces. Okay, do we maintain that, or do we shift gears and we start going after natural resources and investing in the Belt Road? And you can see that he has gone all over the place. The biggest winner in Qatar is not going to be a football team this year. It's going to be the guy that signed a 27, I can't remember how many billion or trillion, I mean, staggering amount of money for natural gas. These guys are probably one, and I know we have a lot of viewers in here that it's hard for them to tolerate to hear a Canadian that's living in China that doesn't have too much to complain about. But when it comes to making business decisions, these Chinese very seldom lose on what they invest in. And when they put their money down, it's down in quite a big way. And to really answer the rest of your question, is the G20 a shift in global power? China is not really interested in getting into the headlights of and being, it's not a country that really it can. And it should, in some way, go out and promote itself better. Even the media here doesn't really go on the attack mode. Like I was assuming that some of our state media here would have at least gone out and attacked these BBC channels, but they just let it run. They just let it run and let it flow. And I think that's the weakness of China. They are very strong on investing in countries and doing it really kind of in a stealth mode. And some of these work out, some of these deals don't work out. But for most part, that is how they become extremely powerful around the world, is building relationships. Instead of spending hundreds of billions of dollars blowing up other countries, they decide to put 10 billion in this country, 15 billion in that country. And I think quietly they are gaining allies one by one and completely ignoring the collective West, really, to be honest.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, this is my impression from Bali, and I must admit it was not my initial impression. It happened under the radar, if you like. But as I said, if you actually look at who was talking to whom and who was cutting the deals, it becomes very real. Patrick, if I can just come back to Ukraine, I'm going to say something which I think is going to be very controversial. I'm not sure how well it would be received in any part of this conflict, but I suspect that in 2023, the West's focus is going to start to shift away from Ukraine. It's difficult to convey in Britain, where I live, how deep the economic problems here are becoming. I have relatives through marriage in Germany, and I gather the same is true there. And I think that trying to sustain interest in this conflict in Ukraine, in the West, is going to be extremely difficult. Now, that may be good and it may be bad. It may be good in the sense that it might mean that there's less interest in sending weapons and funding Ukraine, and there might be more opposition to this. There's also, I think, a danger that if there's a lot of interest, the thing could just be left alone, and all sorts of really ugly things as a result might happen. Because to the extent that there's any supervision at all, which probably there isn't much, but that might melt away. But that is my own sense. I think that Ukraine is the big event of 2022. Unless there's a dramatic collapse, I wonder whether it will be in 2023. In the West, I mean.
Well, we can. It's a very kind of multi-level question, I could say. We've got the levels of how it is in the media, how it is in the Ukraine being supported by the government, and how it is in the eyes of the people. I can tell you as far as how it is in the eyes of the media and the population attention on the situation is going down severely. From how many people are looking at the situation here now compared to how they were in March, in April, May, and even June is just a fraction. And now, is it because they're just losing interest, or is it because they're being guided to lose interest and be guided like sheep by the Western mainstream media and the Western governments? Now, are they being guided to lose interest so the Western governments can also lose interest, so that it doesn't look like the West is letting Russia win? They can't. The West can't let Russia win while all of the Western population has their eyes on the situation heavily. They have to make it look like Russia winning is in the best benefits of the West. Somehow they have to guide the people into believing this, so they don't come out on the bottom. But yes, the United States, I mean, they're running out of javelins, and other military equipment. I mean, the rate it started, it's not going that fast anymore, and it's not going to speed up as far as the lethal aid that is. Even though how many times Zelensky goes on the television and demands the U.S. send billions and billions and billions, and then gets laughed at by the reporters in the States. I mean, even they're starting to laugh at him. It's kind of getting ridiculous at this point. But yeah, it seems like it's all a plan now for the West to slowly step away from Ukraine. And the population of Donbass hopes that happens soon, because the fact is, thousands of people have died because this war did not end quickly. The West prolonged this war with their lethal aid, and it was lethal on both sides. I mean, there's not much more to say. It's just a guided path from the West.
I mean, you do still find some fanatical people. I read an extraordinary article in The Guardian this morning, in which somebody was recommending that the United States sends a third of its Abrams tanks to Ukraine. That is apparently the solution to the problem. But I mean, that's not going to happen. And in fact, I get the sense that the Pentagon, the defense ministries, France apparently today has said that it's run out of weapons that it can afford to send to Ukraine. Wow. So I think this is, this is a moment when we're going to start, however much we want to in the West, I'm talking about the leaderships, the governments now, however much they want to keep the focus on and, fight this to victory, events are forcing them to tiptoe away. And I can completely understand why people in Donbass, especially, who have been the target of all this attention. By the way, I should say, one of the things in the West is you never see people talk about people in the Donbass. I said the target of the attention, but of course they're attention, but they're also invisible. And they have no agency. I mean, they're all controlled by the Kremlin. If they protest or vote in a certain way, it's because, well, they're not really doing it. It's because the Kremlin has its agents there. But anyway, I can well understand why people in the Donbass would be entirely happy if the West simply did tiptoe away after all the damage that's been done. Anyway, that's as far as I'm going to discuss today. I was wondering whether either of you have final comments to make, and perhaps Patrick and then Alex, perhaps either of you have anything further that you wish to add before I.
Can I ask a question from all three of you? Actually, just one question.
Yeah, of course.
And I guess we'll start Patrick, Alex, and then we'll go Alexander. We'll kind of work down like that.
Okay.
How do you see things playing out over the next, say, 1 to 2 months with regards to everything in Ukraine? Whether it's the moves that Zelensky's going to make, the military, the collective West. I hear reports now that we have the situation in Bakhmut, we have Ugledar, we have Marinka, we have this half encirclement that they're talking about with Bakhmut, and it looks like the capture of Bakhmut from the Russian military it seems inevitable at this moment in time. We're getting reports of an offensive in Kharkov, even towards the Russian Federation. You get rumors like that going on. You've got rumors that Ukraine military is sending more resources to Bakhmut to continue fighting there. We hear Zaporozhye, the nuclear power plant. Alexander mentioned that France is running out of weapons, but then you have Republicans in the U.S. saying, no, we are going to continue to send weapons. And just today, I was reading a report from Republicans saying we're going to send our own groups to Taiwan because that's going to be where we want to get things going. So short term, whether it's on the ground in Ukraine, whether it's funding the conflict in Ukraine, maybe a different conflict in Taiwan. I don't want to put anyone in a type of prediction mode or predicament, but how do you see things playing out? What's your sense of things? And we'll start with Patrick, Alex, and Alexander.
Well, as far as on the ground, predicting, I kind of, my sense is that they're going to be, as soon as it freezes, like we said, they're going to be moving into the Kharkov region. I would say what I see from the people of Donbass, the people of Donetsk and Donetsk People's Republic are really just yearning for all of the Donetsk People's Republic to get taken control of. I mean, can't tell you how many people I know who have families on the other side that they have not seen since early February because of this. And I mean, people they just tell their families, go to the basements and wait for us if something happens. And I mean, we were talking about civilians, and we're talking about people on this side, soldiers that have families on that side. People whose mothers and brothers and sisters are waiting for them on that side, and they're just in these small villages that are just have tanks in the garden. I know one family in particular whose mother has a home and there's a tank in her yard, and she has sons who are fighting on this side trying to get to her, and just saying, just getting a hole and wait on us. So that's what the people are wanting. But what's going to happen in the next months? There's no way to tell. I mean, this last after February 24th has just gone so different than anyone's ever expected. It's hard to say at this point. But can I add something else? One thing that it kind of seems to be falling through the cracks a bit is Belarus's potential involvement. I mean, they're over and over again saying that Ukraine is conducting provocations on the border. and they're saying they're going to be reacting to these provocations. And what that reaction is going to be, I mean, there's Russian soldiers training in Belarus. Is Belarus going to fully come in? Who knows? But they keep hinting on it a lot. So that's something that could happen in the next months, and that would definitely change up things quite a bit.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Alex, how do you see
Sure.
things?
Another area that I think Patrick and I have actually been to, Transnistria. I'm very curious on how they're managing to get soldiers in and out there, since you used to be able to get through that area through the Ukraine side. Obviously, that's been closed. The only way through is Moldova. Moldova is closing its airspace. Pretty much no Russian troops are being allowed. So that's something that I'm kind of curious about what's going to happen there. That could be another catalyst in that area. The other thing that I really want to focus on here is look what NATO did in Yugoslavia over their 78-day aerial bombardment. They were not polite. They were nasty. They blew that country into absolute smithereens, okay? Nothing was left. I visited after that war happened. It was an absolute tragedy. No one likes war. No one likes to see people die. But I think the Russians have been quite polite here in regards to sending some warning shots off into, hey guys, we're going to slowly degrade your electrical system here. The next step could be the rail lines. The next step could be the water filtration plants, the water facilities and stuff like that, trickling it down to hopefully talk some sense into a man that is throwing his generation. I'm talking about Zelensky here, throwing his future generation for his country into the battle line where he's losing thousands of young soldiers, on a senseless war that he could sit back and maybe think about diplomacy, but being stubborn, sending young soldiers in to die when the warning shots are there. It's very clear that, by this time, I would think that there would be diplomacy, but Russia, I think, has been quite polite. Of course, let's not fool ourselves. They have a very powerful army. They could do a lot more damage than what they've done. And, taking out the electrical grids is kind of, to me, to try to really understand this situation, is that's a signal from Russia saying, you know what, guys, we could do worse and we may do it, but are you crazy enough to continue this? And that's where I think that they're going to probably, as Patrick is saying here, possibly ramp it up here in the next month. And I think that ramp up could be hitting more targets like railroads and water facilities and stuff like that to make really things a lot more difficult. No one likes war, guys, but that's just my 2 cents on that.
Well, I'll give my personal view. I'm afraid I don't think there's much chance of diplomacy having any real effect on this war. I think that there's been a lot of private and quiet discussions about this in the West. I think there's people who can see that this is not working out at all well. There's undoubted Ukraine fatigue. France, as I said, it's tapped out in terms of its military supplies. The problem is, whenever anybody talks about diplomacy, you have the hardliners who are still very much in the ascendant, who have the backing of the media behind them. They are always able to stalemate, to checkmate, rather, any attempt at negotiations. So we have people like Stoltenberg, for example, saying quite needlessly, I mean, it was completely needless what he said, that of course Ukraine will join NATO one day. And it was the reason he's saying that is because he is saying that in order to sabotage any step towards negotiations. So I think from the West, there's not going to be an initiative towards diplomacy. From the Ukrainian side, I don't think there's going to be any impetus towards diplomacy. And I think, Alex, I'm afraid you provided part of the explanation for all of this with what you discussed about the situation in Monaco. Far too many powerful people in Ukraine, putting aside all the ideological issues which are there and should not be underestimated, far too many people are making personal enormous benefits from this to want it to stop. That is another ugly side of war. It's a reality of war that we have to face. I'm afraid people sometimes benefit from wars, and that means that they're going to agitate against stopping them. And they're in a powerful position to prevent that happening. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to continue to see the war. And we're going to see, I have gradually come around to the view that the Russian approach to this war is going to be gradualist. I think that Patrick is absolutely right. They will be focusing initially on Donbass, clearing Donbass of Ukrainian forces, because that's an overriding political and strategic priority. Acting in Kharkiv region, because I think they've come to realize that large concentrations of Ukrainian troops in Kharkiv region are a threat to, if you like, pre-2022 Russia, if I can use that expression. So I think that is where they're going to be focused on. I don't think we're going to see a march on Kiev, at least not in the next couple of weeks or months. And I am afraid that these attacks on the energy system, the railway system, possibly the Dnieper bridges, possibly all of those things are going to continue and perhaps intensify, because that is the inexorable dynamic of war. If you're involved in a war, even if you start with the best of intentions, you want to try and keep things under control. You are aiming for negotiations with the other side. You say you won't attack the civilian infrastructure. All of those things that the Russians said right at the beginning. If the other side wages war without limits, then eventually you're driven to do that yourself. That is the nature of war. The only way to have prevented these things, the great tragedy of this war, the destruction of a country and its people, because that's what we're seeing. The only way to have done that was through negotiations. And for the worst reasons, the worst possible reasons, those negotiations, whatever they've been attempted, they've been prevented from happening. And we see that the same process is playing out again. So I'm afraid a continued grinding down by the Russians, as they've said, of the Ukrainians, of the Ukrainian forces. And in the meantime, the biggest story in the world, the rise of the Eurasians, but at the center of that, China. And I think China is going to start opening up. I think the one effect, this is my own view, the one effect of these protests and all of this discontent is that the Chinese government is going to start ever so slowly and carefully and prudently revising its pandemic control policies. We're choosing our words very carefully. We're going to see China opening up. We're going to see the Chinese economy gearing up and accelerating in speed again. That's going to, by the way, have an effect on energy prices around the world. It's going to have an effect on the whole global economy. And in the meantime, the whole process that we saw in Bali and we're seeing internationally of a gradual rearrangement of the international system, that's going to continue and accelerate. And the big story in the West is going to be the deepening economic problems which we have, which in Europe are becoming very real, and also the efforts that we see from the United States, or rather from some people in the United States, to reverse these great global processes, and with all the enormous dangers that that carries. So that's my own view. That's how I see events shaping out over the next couple of months. And Putin said in a speech he gave at Valdai that we're going to be in for a difficult 10 years, and I'm afraid he's right.
I have one question actually for both Alexes, and I just want to say it's great to see you again, Patrick. Really, I miss you, my friend, and really, this is my only chance sometimes to say hi to you is on these live streams because you're always on the front line doing something.
Hopefully, we can change that soon and get together. But
my heart goes out to you, brother, and I want you to be safe every step you take. Please be safe, okay? My question is for Alex and Alexander. Elon Musk has, as we all know, has taken over Twitter. we're starting to see some really interesting tweets from him come out here about exposing a lot of stuff that's coming out here in the media. Do you guys think he's going to play a part here with his Twitter, with that platform in some way in this war, as information wise? Are we going to see some stuff we should have never seen come out?
Possibly, but don't underestimate the forces that are lining up against him. You see already the European Union is threatening, in effect, to ban Twitter. Well, who would have thought it? But anyway, they're now threatening to do that. You see threats of investigations. Now, the thing about Musk is that he is enormously rich. He is at the forefront of the electric car revolution, which Western governments have invested an enormous amount in supporting. So he's a more difficult opponent. And I'm going to say something else.
And rockets.
This is always, and rockets and all kinds of Starlink and all that. I find Musk a very, very difficult person to understand. I say to myself, would he have been ever able to get to the position that he has if he wasn't somebody who was seen as, shall we say, politically on our side? So this all seems rather, maybe he's had some great conversion. Maybe all this is real. Maybe he's maneuvering in some way that I just don't understand. But for the moment, all I say about this is all I can do is sit back and enjoy this, because the whole business of Twitter, I have to say, I find it extremely entertaining and funny. I hope nothing bad happens to Musk, because I never want anything bad to happen to anybody. But I don't know where all this is going. But it has exposed some extraordinary language and ideas from some people. I think it was Jonathan Turley, the lawyer, who said, that the attitude of some people is censorship or death. This is a huge, battle that they're going to fight. Freedom of speech, we don't want it. That's somehow not acceptable in democracies. But I don't know what Alex makes of all of this.
I agree with you, Alexander. It's hard to figure out what Musk's angle is in all of this. He definitely has an angle. No, you don't get to 150 billion without having some sort of angle or some sort of a plan in place. And you don't get to that kind of money without being part of some establishment. It's just not realistic. So I haven't figured out what his angle is or what his end game is, but I do know this: the one country, the one thing that connects all of these stories that we've been talking about is Ukraine. Whether it's Starlink and Musk, whether it's FTX and Monaco, whether it's all the money for the military-industrial complex, whether you go back to the Maidan coup, whether you look at Burisma and Hunter, many people, they just forget about how involved Joe Biden was in Ukraine as vice president under Obama. He was effectively the person running the country while he was vice president. Yeah, you had Petro Poroshenko there, but it was Biden that was traveling to Ukraine every 3 to 6 months, telling everybody what's going to happen and what they need to do. So, the one thing that connects all of these pieces together is Ukraine. Now, Musk, whether he wanted to get involved in Ukraine with Starlink, whether Starlink was hijacked by the Pentagon, and now it's being used as a weapon of war, and he's kind of saying, oh, crap, how did I end up in this conflict? I didn't want any piece of this. I don't know. I don't know how all of that went down, but I also know this. Living in Greece and Cyprus, I have learned that the very wealthy, when they want to buy themselves political cover or leverage, they buy two things. They buy either a sports team or something in media. That's how they get leverage. That's how they provide themselves some cover. That's how they fight back against other powerful forces, maybe governments, maybe other oligarchs. Maybe this is an oligarch thing that's going on, an oligarch war that's going on. But they buy a media company so that they can get some leverage, so that they can fight back. And I think Musk, he's he's got Twitter now, and he's got a lot of secrets at his disposal. I mean, people forget he has all the DMs of people, all the messages. He's got all of their web traffic. He's got a ton of data and a ton of information. And over the past week, he's been hinting at leaking this stuff. It's like playing poker. He's saying, "Look, I've got the laptop stuff. I've got the election stuff. You don't believe me? You think I'm bluffing? Let's play the game." But I haven't figured out what he wants out of this. Does he want out of Ukraine? Does he want to take Starlink and say, "Look, I don't want to be involved in this war"? Does he want something else? Is he trying to bargain for something related to his core companies like Tesla or SpaceX? Is he using all of this stuff so he can get perhaps legislation there? I have no idea. I have no clue. But it is interesting to watch. But once again, the nexus of all of this is Ukraine, and it hasn't started now. It started way, way long ago. This is even before Maidan. All kinds of nasty stuff was going on in Ukraine. And let's not forget that the Russians, the Chinese, they must have all kinds of information as to what has been going on in Ukraine. I doubt that the Russians don't have everything, every move that Hunter made in Ukraine. I bet you the Russians have everything. I mean, everything that he was up to. So who knows?
Who knows?
Patrick, I commented on Transnistria before. Are we hearing anything about that?
Not really. I mean, it's definitely something that could end up taking part, but we thought we were going to get to Transnistria a lot earlier. I mean, because that was the goal. Mariupol, then Zaporozhye, Kherson region, Odessa, and bam, they're there. Not so much, but it's all a process, I guess. But as far as your question of how do soldiers getting there and back, I'm not sure if they're actually worried too much about it at this point, because I mean they've got their military that they've got there set up, and as far as I know, there hasn't been too much fighting there. It's just an area that I don't have a lot of concentration on at this point. But I think down the road we might have to take another trip there to see something interesting.
Yeah, I mean, a lot apparently is going on in Moldova. I mean, there's been protests against the government, there's been power outages, there's been all kinds of things, and there's been talk about crackdowns. It's a complicated situation in Moldova, perhaps not getting as much attention as one needs, but I don't get the sense that the Moldovan government is particularly keen at the moment on getting involved in a tussle with the Russians, because God help us, it's got enough problems already on its hands. That's my own sense. I may be completely wrong about that.
Their entire electric grid is from Ukraine, isn't it?
Yeah,
Moldova. Or
some of it goes through Transnistria as well. Some of the grids go through Transnistria. So I'm sure they're coming up with a new price scheme as we speak. So it's interesting, but very interesting. And I just want to say, well, I've got the opportunity that once again, I commend all you guys here on this panel. Really, all three of you are the people that as soon as I wake up in the morning, these are the first three videos that I watch. Alexander, the Duran, and Christopher's channel, and of course yours, Patrick. You guys are amazing, and I really commend you again for the energy that you guys put into serving many people around this world, bringing them the truth that we rightfully deserve. So thank you, gentlemen.
Well, thank you for those very, very kind words. I think we've probably reached a good point actually to wrap up. So I think the best thing for me to do is to thank you both, Patrick and Alex, for joining us. I hope we have you back soon. Patrick, stay safe.
I will. We'll try, and thanks for having us for sure.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Alex. Once again, I have all of Patrick and Alex's information in the description box, and I will also have it as a pinned comment as well. Go follow their work. the best work on YouTube, on the internet. Go follow them. I will have all the information down below. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to our moderators as well. Thank you to everyone that was watching this stream. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.